up, everybody? Heaven here. I just wanted to share with you, yesterday I was watching this documentary on the making of the Vogue cover for this month, which is also the theme of the Met Gala, which is black tailoring, um, which is really just black excellence, black renaissance, black dressing, black people in fashion, black expression through fashion, in dandyism specifically, is like what the focus is. And it reminded me of a lot of things. And one of the big things it reminded me of is when I was living in San Francisco, when I was probably doing the most as far as like my career, just like working consistently, and not just working consistently, but also doing pieces that required a lot of effort, both creative effort and physical effort, preparation. There was a lot going on. I was working a lot. I was always training, I was always rehearsing, I was always thinking of new ideas. Anyway, and just in my life there, I remembered feeling so unhappy in the midst of having such a big career at the time. I mean, everyone knew me. Everyone loved the work that I did. Everything that I did was boom, boom, boom. Even I was impressed with the stuff that I was doing, which is fun. That's what makes it fun. You're like, whoa, I have this idea and I can, see it come to life. And then you're like, wow, that's exactly how I saw it. And it's exciting. But in the midst of that, I was living in San Francisco, which I feel very comfortable as saying is one of the most overtly, no, I don't even want to say overtly, one of the, because it's not even always overt, but it is one of the most racist places I've ever lived. Just to put it really plainly. And, sometimes that sort of behavior is so embedded in people that they don't see that they're doing anything. They would never say that they were doing that because that's who they are, because that's the culture of the area. I remember I went to go walk into a CVS, and the woman who worked there was trying to stop me from coming in. As soon as I walked in, she was like, excuse me, like literally just like that. Mind you, I had called before. I was getting photos printed. I had emailed photos, so I was coming to get what I had already ordered. And imagine that just on like a Tuesday. I was wearing athletic wear because I had just finished running, right? And it's so funny because that's one thing that the dandyism talks about. It talks about clothes as sort of a tool for navigating space. Specifically, this issue is talking about that for black people, right? Because your clothes say something to someone else. So you're wearing your clothes as a way to express yourself, also something that you like, but also you're saying, whatever you're saying. Like, and you might do it in a different way, but, you might say, I'm respectable. I'm an intellectual. And you're saying it through your clothes. It just so happened in that instance, I was wearing athletic wear because I run every day. I had just done 6 miles or something. Um, and and it sends this message, or it did at the time. I interpreted it as this message of, and this wasn't the first time, but of looking a certain way and being received a certain way. But the point is that sort of thing went on throughout San Francisco everywhere. Someone once in my apartment building followed me to my apartment because they didn't believe I lived there. And I was like, get out of my way. And so they followed me. And then I went to my door and I opened the door, proving to them that I lived there. Somebody once, I was sitting in my room, in my bedroom, by the window. And someone once took out their phone and they were filming me from the street. And they were like, I can see you, thinking that I broke into the apartment. And I just stared at them. They're literally recording me like, I can see you. You know, um, yeah. I remember walking down the street, like a main street, Market Street, during the day. Nothing was happening. And there were just police standing right there for whatever reason. I don't know why. And when I walked past, one of them put their hand over their gun. And I was nowhere near them. And it was sort of like, all these things were things that I was experiencing aside from also just the racism and hate from my own peers. Also, I was, if I'm going to be really honest, which I'm not always like super plain with these things, I often sometimes sugarcoat them, but those hoes are jealous. When I was in San Francisco, people either really, really liked me or they hated me. And so I was living in this world and I felt very unseen. You know, even the friend that I had there that I had known previously was not a friend there. They were barely even an ally. And it's so funny because I remember growing up, my parents used to always say, and it's so weird to say this out loud. I never really tell anybody this, but this is what they used to say. Because I was, you know, a military child, so I went to a lot of schools on military bases or close by. So it was mostly white children that I was going to schools with white teachers. Occasionally it wasn't that way, like in Portsmouth, Virginia. But they always wanted to remind me, like, you know, what they would, I'm summarizing, but pretty much they would say something to the effect of, these white people do not care about you. And when it comes down to it, they will leave you. They will, if it were to come down to some sort of like, you know, like something like the Holocaust, they would turn their backs on you in a second. So you need to know that. And I remember when I was living in San Francisco and this friend that I had known for years was there. They're like on the surface very giving, generous, in a way that actually they lack boundaries, but that's a whole other conversation. There were all these things that were happening with their friends. Their friends were, I mean, they were doing the craziest things, you know, and I'm not used to people, I don't try and hurt people. So when someone does it to me, it's sort of like, what's happening? Like what is actually going on? And then for them to be this friend of mine, their friends, like friend people that they live with, people that they consider family, it was sort of like, and I was reminded of that. Not that I necessarily agree with that. I'm not making that as like a blatant statement, but like overall, but I was reminded of that in that situation because that person was not a friend in those situations at all. And I remember I was living in this mental world of feeling so alone. You know, when I went on stage, which is a whole nother thing, I just watched this whole video about how America is a business. And really everything is about exploiting you in some way, and performance being one of those things. And when I'm on stage, everyone loves me. It's just like, you know, that line from a Beyonce song. I think it's, was it Ya Ya? I can't remember which song it was. But pretty much she was saying, you know, when we were coming in through the kitchen, you were fine because they were coming in to perform. We're being quiet. We're going through the kitchen because, you know, black people weren't allowed to come through the front doors. Everything's fine. But now that we want to come through the front door, you have a problem. And that's what it reminded me of. Like whenever I was on stage, everyone loved me. You know, everyone's like, you're the best, you're the greatest. They want to book me for this, they want to book me for that. But when it came to self-respect or being treated like a human, you know, it was a no. Even like I remember when I was living in San Francisco, one of the last places I lived, I feel like I won't say the name of it, but a lot of you know the place that's on Ninth Street. It's also a venue. The owner, one of the owners, pretty much, we were going to renew my lease. That was the whole thing. She's like, okay, I have to drop the lease, you know, so you can, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm waiting for her to do this. And then she calls me. Yeah, she calls me or texts me. I can't remember. Text me. No, she texts me because she didn't have a backbone. She texts me and she pretty much said, hey, this is exactly how the conversation went. Hey, you're still staying, right? And I said, yeah, just waiting for you to draw up the new lease. She goes, okay, great, because I just rented the room to somebody else. And I was like, you can imagine the confusion just from that, let alone from the actual agreement, but just from the way the conversation was worded. You're still staying? Oh, okay, great, because I rented the room to someone else. Not to mention just, you rented the room to somebody else when we already made this agreement. I'm just waiting for you to, I've been waiting this time for you to draw up this lease so I can sign the new lease. So all my eggs were in this basket in San Francisco, which we already know is a place that's very difficult to find housing. You know, there's homeless people everywhere, but homeless people with jobs. Do you know what I mean? And it felt so precise, intentional, targeted. And I remember when I walked in, then like I didn't see her around the house for some time. When I walked in one day, she literally, I'm not exaggerating, ran in the other direction. She looked at me, saw me, and ran. And when you're living in a place, and it felt very targeted. There's nothing. I if I'm gonna be really honest, it felt like because I was black and I was excellent. That's what it felt like. I'm gonna be completely honest, and whenever these situations come up, no one ever agrees to that. No one says, no, that's not true. No, it's not. It's not. That's what it was. And the reason all this came up for me was because I was watching that documentary I was telling you about. And it was so incredible because everyone's black on the covers. There's multiple covers. The whole issue is black dandyism. So, it's all these black people from Hollywood all together in these different vignettes, celebrating black tailoring over the years, because previously, you know, maybe black people couldn't get their hands on certain clothes or whatever. So the way that you would get your clothes was actually they would be handmade, they would be made or tailored specifically for you by a tailor in your neighborhood, a black tailor. And that's where a lot of that's like a manifestation of a certain kind of self-respect when you as someone who's black in like the 60s or 70s can have clothes that fit you nicely and it's your tailor who's making you look fresh and you can come correct, you can go and you can you know what I mean? It's a very empowering thing. And the different actors were not just actors because they were musicians as well, but all the black talent were talking. And one of them, I can't recall her name now, she was saying it's so incredible because all of us are so used to being the only black person in the room, like on set, which any person, not any person, but a lot of us, because it's changing more now, but still, it's still prevalent this way. A lot of us are used to being the only black person. When you're really excellent, when you're at a higher level, um, that's what often happens. I've been on a lot of sets, films. I've been extra in all sorts of films. I was a lead in the film that still hasn't been released. And you're the only black person there, and a lot of crazy things happen. I'm just, they're not crazy to the people who are doing them, but as a person of color, you're like, WTF is going on? Like, no joke. It's not even like, it's not just a nice little, you know, point to say, like a little, what's the word? Like trending phrase to say, but that's really what it's like. I remember being on set for this film, and there was this man who was a person of color. I won't even go into the specifics. He was not black though, and they were jokingly like mocking his character like between takes, but in a very racially specific way. And I was like, I couldn't believe it was. I was so shocked. I was like, this is crazy and unacceptable. Like, this is a professional. This is a set for a movie. There's tons of people here. There's a lot of money going on to make this movie happen. Anyway, and the point is, she was saying all those actors and all those musicians are used to being the only black person in the room, maybe one or two. And she was saying that she walked on the set and everybody looked like her. And, if you are a person of color, you understand. And if you're not, this might just sound like nothing to you because you don't ever have to think about this. But the idea of walking to a space where you belong, like where everyone assumes you belong, there was this video I saw of what's his name? The one who used to do the Late Show. He's from Africa. I can't think of his name. He's from South Africa. I can't think of his name right now, but you know him. He's very funny, and he he used to do the Late Show. He hosts the Oscars. Or the Grammys. He hosts the Grammys. Anyway, he was talking about how men in Africa are happier than men in America, black men, and his sort of explanation was that men in Africa live in a world where everywhere they go, it's expected that they belong there. So like, you go to the store and everyone's like, hi, hey you. When they walk down the street, they go, oh hey, look, there's a guy. you know, as opposed to walking down the street and people covering their pockets and you know, looking over their shoulder at you or crossing the street, you know. That happened to me in San Francisco every day. That happened to me in Philadelphia still. And you're sort of like, WTF? Like, you're 10 years younger than me. I'm about to backslap and backhand you. But the idea of being somewhere where, and of course, you know, people of color are humans too, so there's still like humans at play. But the idea of walking into a room where you belong, where everyone just assumes you belong, where everyone sees you to a higher degree, because they know a lot about what it takes for you to be this excellent in this world. And there's more compassion for your experience. Um, and when there's more compassion for your experience and just who you are, people just, they see you more. There's more love that you experience, closeness. You know, I remember seeing this video, and I don't mean to make this whole thing like, this is not an anti-white thing because I could care less. But I saw this video recently of Kate Moss at a fashion show, and she was sitting. She wasn't modeling. She was sitting at the fashion show, and I remember thinking like, wow, it must be incredible to be a white woman in a white world. I mean, I'm sure, you know, obviously there's men, so there are still problems to be had, but like, she's a white woman, and she's Kate Moss. Like, do you know what I mean? Not to downplay anybody else's experience because everybody has, you know, humans experience all the same emotions and everybody has their own trials. Um, but the point is, when I saw this video, and you know, a bunch of them were going in on it. Like one of them, Aaron Pierre, was saying like, I didn't want to leave because I felt so welcomed, I felt so warm, I felt so seen. It was like, I'm supposed to leave here, and it reminds me that my ideal like environment is one of like diversity and inclusion. Um, yeah. Um, and the idea of walking into living in a place where when I walk outside, people see me and they don't see my color. Because the truth is, when you're with a bunch of black people, no one's thinking about your race because everyone's black. Matter of fact, when everyone's black, no one's black because black is only something that exists to describe you as not being white. Do you know what I mean? So you're not really like, when you say black, when you're with a bunch of black people, you're more saying cool. Like when you're talking about black people, when you're with black people, that's really what black means. Whereas when you're saying black to someone else, you're saying, you know, something, a whole bunch of other things. But it really moved me. It almost brought me to tears. Like I was on the verge of tears the whole video because, well, one, it was just so beautiful. I mean, the everything that they were showing these black photographers' work. They were talking about the Black Renaissance. I remember even Felicia Rashad. I think it was Felicia Rashad was talking about what she worked at some university, and anyway, they were talking about. There's this interview I saw where they were talking about being in this environment where there was blackness. I want to say at like Princeton, so like there was still that cool, dope element of blackness of like music, of taste, of this, but also the intellectual side, and that harmony resonated with me because I often feel that way. I'm very intellectual. I mean, there are plenty of black people who are, but the black culture overall, like the church, that's thrown in your face is not often that. It's often just like one thing. Not saying that that one thing can't be intellectual, but I am diverse. My tastes are here, 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 here. You know, I'm reading this, I'm doing that, and I'm putting it all together, and you create this dope, smart, nuanced, cultured, you know, feeling. And the idea of being in an environment like that where everyone's dope, intellectual, traveled, and black, wow. Like that sounds like sounds like so exciting. Like, you know, people are talking about philosophy, spirituality, and they can see other people. You know, even now, like in Philadelphia, I'm just so grateful to be around black people. There were like that was another thing in San Francisco, or in Mexico City. I lived in Mexico City and San Francisco back to back, where there's just no black people. San Francisco, you do sometimes see black people, but they're usually homeless. So you're not seeing black people as a part of society. Um, and I remember I went to this event in Philadelphia, and it was a black event. I mean, it wasn't like outwardly saying black, but the people who run it were black, and so the people who come were black. And it wasn't very nuanced, though. It was like most of the people, and there's nothing wrong with this, were aspiring rappers, and so and they were from Philly, and maybe I don't know if any of them had ever left Philly. I don't know, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the point was that's what the environment was. So you come in as someone who's more nuanced, who grew up in a mixtures of environment, who has a broader perspective, and I don't say broader to say better, but just like a different perspective on life, and it reflects in the way you speak, your interests, your focus. Um, you know, there's nothing wrong with these things, but I'm not saying a poetry about killing people or, you know, smoking weed, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's not the perspective I'm coming from. And when you're going into an area where that's the only thing, like I feel like in this specific event, it's not always like this. I'm talking about this one event because obviously there's all different types of black people in Philadelphia. But the point is, at this one event, it was so honed in like this on a specific type of blackness. And I remember thinking, this is almost the same as being in San Francisco. Really, it's just coming from another end. You know what I mean? And so that's what I mean when I talk about too, like this idea of like this ideal world. It's not just having narrow-minded. I don't want to go from a world where it's narrow-minded Caucasians to go to narrow-minded black people. That doesn't sound good at all. The idea is that really resonates with me is this world of open, nuanced. The nature of being open and curious is underplayed, I think, in society, because that kind of shapes how you go into every interaction. You know. Anyway, I felt inspired to share that, and really, my heart is like so open to be loved in a way that I feel like this black dandyism conversation kind of nurtures. And it would warm my heart to be in a room full of black creatives from all different backgrounds and their beautiful skin and their beautiful hair and their beautiful talent and humor all like appreciating one another too. You know, because there has to be the spirit of like mutual appreciation for it to be interesting. But anyway, I just wanted to share that. So thank you for listening.